Hello and welcome back. This is the week 15 lecture, the final lecture of the semester. I'm sure that's good news. I'll try to keep this one somewhat brief, but I do want to do a few different things today. So we will cover our final text of the semester, the short story entitled Circumstance that comes from a larger short story collection called The Amber Gods by Harriet Prescott Spofford. So Spofford is our last required author of the semester. So that means she's the final author who will appear on the final exam. So we will talk a little bit about the exam today and the final paper. I just want to sort of discuss those assignments a little bit more because I know we are getting to the point now where we are working on them, or we're at least getting ready to start working on them soon. So I'll start by just saying a few things about the exam. I don't really want to talk about it too much because I've already posted the study guide. And like I said last week, I really don't think you guys need to stress out too much about the final exam. Yes, it is cumulative, and I know that can be a little stressful in and of itself, but it's not a very difficult test to prepare for. And I've tried to do some of that prep work for you by posting the study guide, which is pretty detailed if you take a look at it. Perhaps the most important thing that I'm doing is I'm telling you all of the text that you are responsible for. So we have read a lot, obviously, throughout the semester, but I've also been posting some supplemental texts many weeks, just things that I wanted to make available to you guys if you had the time to read them, and I was fully aware that many of you probably would not have the time to do that supplemental reading. So I do distinguish between our required text, the things that we were, required to read. All of that's going to be on the exam versus the supplemental stuff that maybe you had a chance to read, but maybe not. So I'm even getting specific about individual titles, like what you can expect to really be tested on, which authors and which texts. And then there's some other stuff that you could write about potentially, but you're not going to be required to. Okay, so notice that, and I'm also talking a little bit about the three sections or the three parts of the final exam. So I've also shown you a sample exam. It is from a different class, but I sort of do these the same way in all of the 400 level lit classes that I teach. So there's always an identification section that's first. Probably the easiest. I mean, it will require you to exercise some memory. But the IDs don't really require a whole lot of writing. You are just literally identifying passages from the text that we've read. You just need to tell me the title of the text, the name of the author, and in a couple of sentences, just very briefly, indicate the significance of the passage. I would like year of publication as well. That is one of the things I'm asking for, but if you're at least close, I mean, I'm probably not going to count off if you are a year or two off. Try to be in the right decade, because we have in some ways sort of, treated this class as literary history. So we need to have at least a sense of when this stuff was published. So if you're in the ballpark, if you're in the right decade, you could even say 1830s or 1840s, and I would probably be content with that. But the ID section, is sort of testing just your overall knowledge and familiarity with our very large syllabus. But again, the only texts that will appear there are required texts. But obviously, you're going to have to figure out where the passage came from. Then the second portion of the exam will be short answer. So I'll just be posing some questions that you guys can answer really in a handful of sentences. You might want to look at your answers as sort of being short paragraphs. You might want to shoot for 3 or 4 sentence long responses. You don't have to write essays, but you are writing more than you did in the ID section. Okay, you're getting into a little bit more detail, and my questions are obviously going to be more specific than just what is this. I'm going to be giving you a chance to sort of use some of the terms, some of the ideas, some of the historical developments that we have been talking about throughout the semester. So this is really, in the short answer section, that's really where you can start to show me your fluency with just sort of everything that we've been doing in this class. And that's especially true of genres. We've been talking about some very particular genres of literature, so I would like you to incorporate some of those. Just other things that I've emphasized in the modules and in lecture. And I'm also going through some of those concepts in the study guide. I sort of have a list of just things that I think are important, ideas, developments that I've talked about that we need to be somewhat aware of if we're going to have a grasp on all of this. So you need to start working some of that in, not only to your responses, but maybe into your final papers as well. And then the final part of the final exam will be the essay portion. I will give you 2 options. You only need to choose one. And this will be a short essay, not on the same scale as the essay you're writing for the final paper. And I also understand that the essay you write for the exam is going to be somewhat rough, because you don't have the benefit of your books. I really don't want you guys to use anything other than the note card that I'm about to discuss. But I don't want you to use the internet, and I don't want you to use our actual books or anything, any online versions of the text. So you're working strictly from memory. You're not going to be able to quote very much. You're going to have to speak a little bit more in general, sort of general terms. And I appreciate that. I do understand that going in. So I won't have quite the same high level of expectation for that essay exam that I would have for our big final paper. But I still want that final essay to be complete. I still want you to have an argument. I still want you to use some textual examples, even if you're just kind of summarizing because you might not remember the exact wording. I still want a pretty good level of detail, and I want to see that you can sort of synthesize a lot of this information and sort of do new and original stuff with it. So that's it. Like I said, I don't really think you guys need to spend a ton of time studying for the exam. Really, the best way to study for a lit exam, obviously use my study guide, but really the best thing you can do is just be sure that you have read all of our required texts, or at least the vast majority of them. That way, you're going to be prepared as long as you're pretty comfortable with the text. Now, because memory can be faulty, and I know it can be difficult to keep all of these names and titles and dates and concepts all in your head, I will allow you guys to use a note card, sort of a standard, I think, what are they, like 4x6, or sort of like whatever the standard note card size is. I wish I don't have one in front of me right now, but you guys know what I'm talking about. You can buy them at the Family Dollar if you don't already have some. This is very old school, I realize, but I would like you guys to just stick with whatever you can get on that note card. Okay, I want to avoid electronic stuff because it's just very difficult to be sure, exactly how all that's working. So I know we're going to be doing these on computers, but as far as the help that you are bringing in, the aids, the outside sort of supplemental stuff, all I want you to use is the note card. You can fill it up front and back, okay? But I just want you to use the note card. So what I would recommend that you guys do, it's really up to you. You know what you will remember best and what you might need a little bit of help to remember, but I would recommend maybe writing down some names, some titles, and some dates. Dates of publication, especially for any text that you really like and you think you might want to write about at length. Maybe in the essay, you don't know exactly what my prompts are going to be, obviously, but they're going to be broad. I'm going to give you chances to write about a lot of different texts. I'm going to be asking broad questions. So you could, you're going to have a lot of room to choose. And in the short answer as well, you're going to have choices about what texts you're talking about, because you don't have to answer every one, right? You have to answer a certain amount of the short answer. You have to respond to one of the two essay prompts. So you can sort of cater what your answers, you can sort of cater them to what you know best, the texts that you are most comfortable with, the ones that you're most eager to discuss. You will have some freedom in that regard. But yeah, I would jot down some of the stuff that you're going to need for the IDs, because a lot of that is just sheer recall. And if you're not good with names, or if you're not remembering the titles of Poe's or Hawthorne's short stories that we read, you might just want to write those down. You might not want to stress yourself by trying to commit all of that to memory. You're probably not going to be able to fit all of the required text on the note card, but maybe you can if you write small enough. And I don't really have a problem with that if that's what you want to do. That might take up most of the note card, but that might be what you want to do. But you could also write down some of the stuff that I'm listing on the study guide as sort of like key concepts or developments or sort of stylistic features for us, things that we've talked about. And again, you might want to jot some of those down so you don't have to commit all of those to memory. But again, I would really write down some thoughts and observations about the text that you like best, because you will probably have some opportunity to talk about at least some of them, if not most of them or all of them. And that's going to help too when it comes to the essay, or when it comes to some of your short answer responses. So use your discretion, use your own good judgment, fill out your note cards, and then that's it. Don't use anything else while you're taking the exam. So I've already talked to a couple of you via email about the proctoring process. So I tried to explain this in the module, or, maybe it was in my instructions. No, I think it was in one of the overviews, but I can be flexible. I know a lot of you are not near GBC, areas, GBC service areas. So if you're not and you can't take the test at a GBC facility, which of course is ideal, if you can't do that, I would really just settle for any public venue, preferably a public library or maybe a computer lab belonging to some other institution. I just find that that's better than doing it at home. We have maybe a little bit less temptation to use some of the many online sources that are available to us at home. And I know if you're at a public library, you could still conceivably do some Google searching and maybe find sources to help you. So we are just sort of operating on the honor system, and I'm just assuming that you guys aren't going to do that. I'll also have the normal plagiarism detection program, installed that I use for a lot of our papers. That's not usually as much of a problem for this level, but I do feel the need to just sort of mention that, of course, we want to avoid using any online sources for the exam. Of course, the rules are very different for the final paper, but for the final exam, I would like you guys to be in a public place where there is some form of supervision. I would like you to abstain from all online sources. Just use your note card, and you can finish the exam in a single sitting. I mean, I wouldn't recommend trying to finish it in like an hour, but maybe 2 hours, 2.5 hours. I wouldn't think any longer than 3 hours. So it's sort of designed to be a single sitting, a single session on a single day. Hopefully that works for everybody, and you can find the time to do it. I just need it by 5 p.m. on Friday, December the 16th. So that's our final deadline for these final 2 assignments. I don't care which one comes in first. I'm not really going to have a chance to grade probably much of anything until that Friday. So I just want everything by the 16th, and then I'll grade it all over that weekend before grades are due on the 20th. So I'm giving you guys practically as much time as I can to get everything done. Okay, so that's the final exam. If you have questions about the study guide, if you have questions about the process of taking it, just email me. If you are using a public facility that's not a GBC facility, all I would ask you to do would be to just email me the contact info, well, the name of the place where you're going to be, the name, the location, and some contact info. It can be an email address or a phone number, just in the event that I need to get in touch with them. I very rarely do, but it would just be nice to have that option. Okay, you can just email it to me. Keep it short, just name, where is it, and some contact info. Okay. And that will be fine. I think that should work for most of us. But if you're having any issues with scheduling or planning the exam, just let me know. And of course, if you are in Winnemucca, Elko, Pahrump, or any of the other GBC service areas, please just go to one of the academic success centers, whichever one you're closest to. Just go and take it there if that is possible. If it's not possible, again, you can talk to me. We can figure something out, but just try to reach out if you're going to need to do something different. Okay, so that's it for the exam. Now let's talk a little bit about the final paper, and then we will turn to Spofford. So like I was saying last week, the final paper is more important to me just on a personal level and in terms of how much it's worth, in terms of, point value in the class. So I want you guys to devote more time to the final paper. The final exam, you study a little bit, catch up on your reading, and then devote that 2.5 hour block of time to take it, and then you're done with the final exam. I want the final paper to get more days of your life, hopefully. I know you have a lot of other work to do, but this is our only really extended essay that we're writing this semester. So I do have pretty high expectations because, of course, with the paper, you can use the book, and please do. Whatever you're writing about, it needs to be open, either on your computer or open next to you on your desk, really the entire time that you're working on the paper, because I really want you guys to offer a lot of specific textual evidence, and you'll be able to do that. You'll be able to quote. You don't just have to rely on your memory. And of course, we're also using outside sources. We're also conducting some research for the final paper. So they're going to be, those final essays are going to be a lot more elaborate, a lot more developed. The argument should be more sophisticated than what we're looking at on the exam. Okay, so just a few thoughts, a couple of just like tips, I guess, just some things that it might be helpful to kind of keep in mind, to sort of think about as you're getting ready to start working on the paper. Just a reminder that proposal and critical summary is due this week. I know that's strange. I made the deadline Wednesday of this week, just so you guys wouldn't feel rushed. I know some of us might have still been doing our final discussion post of the semester last week. So if you already have it done, you can get it to me a little bit early, and I'll go ahead and look at it, because I want to have a quick turnaround with those and give you guys a little bit of feedback about your proposal. But hopefully by now, if we are working on that, or we're going to in the next couple of days, you guys will already have a plan in place. You'll have an idea for your paper, and I'd like to sign off on it before you commit fully. And also the critical summary gives you a chance to start looking around and doing a little bit of research. So you guys have written big papers before. I don't think I need to really explain too much, but just a couple of things to keep in mind. Remember, we want original arguments. We want original interpretations. I mean, a lot of good students at this level still struggle a little bit with making arguments about literature. We can often be pretty comfortable identifying certain things, talking about certain features of literature, but then when it comes to, offering our own original interpretation, sometimes we are a little bit too delicate. We might be a little too cautious. We don't want to stake out a really bold original argument, especially if we're reading something that's maybe a little bit ambiguous. We're not 100% sure that our interpretation is the correct interpretation. Those are common problems, that students encounter. So I just wanted to mention those and tell you that you kind of have to push through some of those fears and sort of apprehensions about sort of offering your own interpretation as true and as valid, and then sort of arguing for it, providing support for it. Sometimes that's, it can be a little hard to do, but that is what we want on this final paper. We want original arguments. It's not enough to just sort of tell me things that are true, that have already been sort of established by previous critics and scholars, things that you found in your research or things that maybe I talked about in lecture. It's not enough to just sort of rephrase that or to present it in maybe a slightly different way. You need to come up with something of your own. Of course, you can build on what some of your sources are saying, what I've said, pre-existing, critical conversations, but ultimately you need to build your own argument on top of that stuff. You need to arrive at that original interpretation. So I would just encourage you guys to get argumentative and really stake out exactly how you think the text should be read, whatever text you're writing about. You're making some kind of argument about how it should be read, how it should be understood, how some specific feature in that text is working, how symbolism is working, or imagery, or some set of metaphors, or whatever it is that you're digging into. Maybe the historical context, maybe a particular character, whatever it is, you're making an argument about that thing. And ultimately, you should be making sort of a larger argument about the text itself. Even if you're primarily focused on a specific feature or a handful of specific features, you need to use those ultimately to say something larger about the text. What the text does, why the text matters, again, how we should read it, how we should understand it, and just bring something new to the table. And be a little bit bold. It's fine to do something that not everybody's going to agree with. That's part of the fun. And try to avoid a lot of plot summary. Okay, sometimes a little bit of it is necessary. Okay, if you need to set the stage, sort of set the scene, tell us what's going on at this particular, pivotal moment in the narrative that you want to unpack and analyze, then yeah, you can engage in a little bit of plot summary, but generally speaking, you don't need to spend a lot of time just telling us what happened. You can assume when you're writing a lit paper, at this level, you have to assume that most of your readers will know the text. Like, we've read it too. So you don't have to spend time on basic plot summary, and then this happened, and then this other thing happened, and then there's this guy, and here's what he did. You don't have to talk about every single character in the story. You don't have to talk about every single thing that happened in the plot. Right? So whatever you are summarizing, if you're summarizing certain events, or if you're summarizing things about characters, or in some cases you might even be talking about the author, you might be talking about a genre, you might be talking about a larger sort of historical development, whatever it is, that's fine. You can talk about that stuff, but you should only be summarizing the things that matter to your argument. You should only be summarizing the narrative events that pertain to whatever you're talking about, the characters that are directly connected to whatever you're talking about, the history that pertains to your argument. Don't just give us history for the sake of history. Don't just give us summary for the sake of summary. It all has to be useful in some way. It all has to be helping you make your argument in some way. So that's a good way to be able to determine, okay, do I need to summarize this? Just ask yourself, does this connect to my argument? Does this help my argument? Is this helping me to accomplish any of my larger goals here? If the answer to at least some of those questions is yes, then maybe you can spend a little bit of time summarizing it. But if the answer is no, or I'm not sure, then you probably don't need that. Okay, sometimes writing these papers, it can be a part of the challenge is knowing what we don't have to include. knowing what we don't necessarily have to cover. So you want to get specific and really dig into your area, your features, the stuff that really matters to you. And you don't need to cover every single thing about the text, okay? That's just too much. We can't do everything in these papers. We have to do a particular thing that we set out to do. So only use the plot summary or any kind of summary that's going to help you with that. What else did I want to say? Oh yeah, so I mentioned textual evidence. That's the best kind of evidence to present in a literature, in any kind of literary analysis. You want to bring in specific examples from your text. They don't all necessarily have to be direct quotes from a character or a narrator. They could also just be specific examples, specific instances of things that are happening. You can paraphrase a little bit. You can summarize. You can take some of what's happening and sort of put it in your own words, but you need to get specific. You need to take us to specific chapters if we're looking at a novel, or, particular paragraphs, particular scenes. If we're looking at a poem, we need to be looking at specific lines, at least specific stanzas. Don't stay on a general level. For a paper of this length, you really have to get specific, and textual evidence will help you to do that. We'll talk a little bit more, not directly, but I can post a little bit more, and you can see sort of a sample outline that I've posted, just talking about body paragraphs and how to start to organize your body paragraphs. That's another thing to think about, as you start to outline, as you're getting ready to maybe begin on a rough draft. Have some kind of rough outline. I make my 101 and 102 students, even at the 200 level, I make those students submit outlines, just so I can make sure they are going through the steps of the writing process and they have some kind of a plan for their essay, so they're not just sitting down in front of a blank computer screen, the night before it's due and cranking something out, because you guys know that's how a lot of students write their papers in 101. I don't make you guys turn in outlines, because I do know that you're more sophisticated writers, but don't skip the outlining stage. Don't jump right into drafting. You really need to have some kind of an outline where you might be able to jot down sort of an early version of your thesis, which you definitely need to think about. That's when you announce your argument in the intro paragraph, and then start planning your bodies. Like, what are you going to be talking about? What are you going to be doing in your body paragraphs? That's important for writers to figure out, at every level. It might be, quicker and easier, and at higher levels, we might just sketch something out really quickly. It's not very formal, and that's fine, but we need to have some kind of a plan. You need to have some sense of how you're going to move through your bodies. That shouldn't be a random occurrence, That shouldn't just be something that happens as you're writing it all sort of in one fell swoop. You need to have a sense for what each individual body paragraph is going to accomplish. And once you start conducting research and you start finding textual evidence, you can start figuring out where a lot of that stuff is going to go. Like, if you want to quote one of your sources, because they're presenting some evidence that you could really use for your argument, where's that going to go? Like, in what paragraph are you going to do that? You need to start thinking about that. Some of the good textual examples you find, quotes from characters, just really beautiful passages of prose that you might want to use for various reasons. You need to start figuring out where that stuff is going to go, and then you can really start to build some of your body paragraphs around some of your examples, some of your source info. But also, you guys might remember this from 102, you just need to have a lot of claims that you're going to make. Your central claim is, of course, your thesis, but you're going to need a lot of smaller claims about the text, about whatever it is you're exploring in the text, and that's how you can really build bodies. And then you can bring in your examples, your sources. You really need to plan a paper like this. It's hard to just sit down and crank it out at this length and with my expectations. So One of the first things I would recommend you guys doing, if you have some time this week, if you haven't done it already, sit down with your chosen text. I'm just using this as an example. We're not actually reading all of the Amber Gods, but just whatever book you're working with or whatever text. If it's online, that's fine. But if you're really going to commit to it, I would print it out and have a hard copy so you can mark it up and read it, in the closest way possible. And just sit down with it before you really start writing anything and just find some stuff. Find what you're going to talk about. Find some of the examples that you're going to use. I always do this before I start writing a project. I sit down with the text and I start looking for some examples that I think I might like to use. By this point, I have an argument in mind. I have a general sense of what I want to do, but I haven't written anything yet. Okay, but I want to start looking for some examples, and then I'm going to mark them, at least make a note, or get those little tabs that you can put in the book so you can find those. You don't want to have to go back through the book and, you're flipping through pages when you're in the middle of writing. You want the writing to be smooth, so you need to have a lot of your examples already found, already sort of marked, or you have notes where you can just flip back to that page. Oh yeah, this one's on page 66. I want to use this. And then I would also just start writing down ideas, things that I want to show, things that I want to illustrate connected to my thesis. So again, when you guys are, trying to figure out what your argument's going to be, it's a little bit like the response papers. You just need to find an angle, find an entry point, something in the text that's interesting to you. It needs to be specific, right? But it could be virtually anything. It could be one of those literary elements that you've learned about in lower level English classes, imagery, figurative language, characterization, setting. Any of those elements are good things to sort of dig into in a literary analysis. But you could also find certain tropes, any kind of recurring features that seem important. Okay, these can be people, objects, these can be verbal elements. If you're identifying certain kinds of repetition, and this is often true with poetry. We can do a lot with form. We can do a lot with rhyme or meter or word choice. If we're looking at short stories or novels, we might be a little bit more plugged in to stuff like setting, characters, but also you could choose some aspect of historical context. You could, in some cases, pursue kind of a biographical angle if you're very interested in the author and you want to make some connection between the author and something that's happening in the text. So there's a lot of ways you can go. If you want to run your idea by me, feel free to email me, but just come up with something. I know that can be frustrating, but that's part of the challenge, is you guys have to find something in your chosen text that you can pursue. In some cases, it can just be an idea. It can be an idea that's on display in the text. It could maybe be an idea that the author is trying to convey. It can be an idea that a character discusses in the text. There's really no limit to the options, but whatever you choose, you have to be able to build an argument around it, and you have to be able to say some original stuff about it. If it's only going to give you a chance to regurgitate pre-existing work, then that's not a great choice. You need to go, kind of go back to the drawing board. But that's obviously step one. Choose your text, find your angle, find your feature, find the thing that you can argue about. Then sit down with the text. Start looking for examples. Start looking for examples of whatever it is you're talking about. Start finding stuff that can serve as evidence or support for some of your claims. And sometimes as I'm doing this, I'm just writing down my own ideas, my own thoughts. Annotate a little bit as you're finding important passages or stuff that you might use later. Write down your own thoughts, your own observations. You can do that with your primary text, which is whatever you are writing about. And you can also do this with the secondary, right? All of your secondary sources, that's the stuff that you're gathering through research. and you can start, annotating those, reading some of those articles. They should spark some ideas. You can respond to them. Just start getting some stuff down on paper. But I really would go back through the text. I would read it again if you have not read it recently, if maybe it was assigned early in the semester, it's been a few weeks or maybe even months. I would return to it, read it, mark it up. Mark it up, annotate it, underline, highlight. I know we don't always want to do that with books that we are planning to sell back and return, but I would encourage you guys to just really mark it up, write down some notes, find some stuff you can use later, and then you can get an outline going, and then you'll be ready to start putting together a rough draft. But remember, I'm a resource. I'm here. I'm a writing teacher. I don't give you guys as much writing instruction, but I teach 101 and 102 every semester. So I'm pretty good at helping people through their papers. If you need a little bit of help, if you need some help getting started, like I said, if you want to run a potential thesis by me, I'm happy to listen. I'm happy to exchange emails with you. We could also do a video conference if you wanted to talk a little bit more. You could show me, if we're video conferencing, you could upload an outline or a draft, and we could both look at it, talk, whatever you want. Just email me. Let me know if you need any help or if you have any questions about either of those final assignments. Okay, so that's it for part 1. We'll come back in part 2 and talk about circumstance.